Hello and welcome back to True Stories with me, Sherry Weens. If you're new here, we cover all kinds of true stories from natural disasters to survivors to true crime. And if you are a returning subscriber, much love. Thank you for coming back. Today I have a crazy story to share with you guys about Canada's House of Horrors. This story originated in Burlington, Ontario, with two ladies by the name of Brandy Cooney and Becky Hamber. They had signed up to be a foster adoptive family with the Child and Family Services. They were able to successfully acquire the child abuse check, the house check, the criminal record check, all the loops and holes they would have had to jump through in order to acquire someone else's life in their hands. There are two boys who were at the time ages 5 and 6 years old. These two boys had suffered from living in domestic violence situation between their birth parents, and for that reason they were removed from the home and they were placed in foster care. And I won't be stating their names. So of course, already having been through the traumatic situation of living in a chaotic household with their parents, my cat's trying to come into the frame here, so I thought I'd just say hello, right? Hello. After having already been through enough traumatic situations in their own home, they were relieved into a foster home that was a loving foster family. They were able to patiently redirect the kids in some behavioral issues that they were dealing with, such as speech impediments, biting, punching, kicking, slapping, and smearing feces on the bathroom wall, as well as overeating to the point of vomiting. Many of those issues did end up getting subsided with the love definitely needed to love and help and support with, and many of those issues did subside with structure and patience and love and kindness and consistent guidance from that foster family. It was very noticeable, the good changes that the boys were experiencing. But even still, with all that gentle love, kindness, and redirection, the eldest boy never quite grew close enough to the foster family where he would call him anything further than their first names. His little brother, for instance, would call him Mama and Dada, but the eldest would only go by the first names, calling out to this foster family that had temporarily adopted them. Although he did seem to grow somewhat closer to the family because it was announced, or it was advised, that the kids are going to be moving into a more permanent adoptive family. At this point that the eldest boy started to act out significantly, running into traffic. He tried to run away, thankfully unsuccessfully, from camp. So despite the lack of connection, he did seem to have some deep connecting feelings for this foster family. Regardless, it was out of his control where he was going to end up going next. And a meeting was set up through the social worker on October 10th of 2017, where Brandy and Becky had a chance to meet with the then 5 and 6 year old boys. Now, their names have been redacted for privacy purposes. It was noted in this meeting that these two boys actually didn't really seem to connect very well with Brandy and Becky, which I feel like that was sort of a cue that was missed for the social worker, of a red flag to say this maybe wouldn't have been the best fit for the boys, but this sadly got missed. So as planned, the boys went from the endearing, beautiful foster family home that they grew and loved to know for 4 years, moving into now what you will soon hear is the House of Horrors in Becky and Brandy's home. One of them never ever left that home. That was the last home that he ever lived into, which is just so heartbreaking. But let me give you a little description of what the house scenario looked like. And if you are somebody who is sensitive to these types of details, this is your trigger warning, but you may want to skip this part. Okay, for those of us that are still here, I will describe to you the setup that Brandy and Becky had for these boys. They had a tiny little room, and they were locked inside of this room with only a mesh cot bed and a garbage can. That's it. No stuffed animals, no books, no stories, no desk, no dresser, no clothes, nothing. Just a room with a mesh cot bed and a garbage can. This was super, super horrific, all in and of itself, and I don't know how it is the home visits ended up missing this, but irregardless, there must have been some sort of setup and takedown. That's the only thing I can think of as to how they were able to fool the social work system and pass these checks and whatnot. Unbelievable. But these ladies actually went and implemented food timers for the kids. So they had a certain amount of time to eat, and if they did not finish, their food was taken away. If they were still hungry, they had no access to any other foods afterwards. They were kept and locked in their room, and due to some of the behavioral issues, the girls decided to implement wetsuits and straitjackets, and they would literally keep these kids locked up in their rooms. They would come out occasionally for their school and whatnot, but these kids were not fed properly. They were not given love and support properly like they should have been. They were given bottles of milk, and they were locked in the room, and they were not allowed to use the washroom. They were not bathed regularly. In fact, when the doctors actually found and had these kids admitted to the hospital, it was noted by the hospital that it seemed as though the kids had just come out of a pool. They had just come out of swimming. That's how wrinkled and pruned their skin was from being in that wetsuit and stuck in their own waste for extended periods of time. Nothing but sheer abuse. And to just leave them restrained and they're wetting themselves, it's just absolutely heartbreaking to imagine that these two boys literally had no love, no support, no haircuts, no clean bathing, no snacks, no playtime, no enjoy life moments. And sadly, it ended up being the last place that one of these boys ever lived. The youngest boy is set to be testifying in court because this whole situation, of course, has led to charges being laid against the ladies. One of the ladies was accused actually of putting zip ties on the youngest child's foot and tying them so tight that it would cut into his skin, and he was expected to walk around like this. Absolutely heart-wrenching. Well, by Christmas of 2022, things had gotten to the point of no return. The health conditions of the eldest boy had completely dropped. He was shivering uncontrollably. They found him. One of his eyes would not focus properly, and he could no longer speak English. He was just not coherently making any sense. The girls decided through text messages, after discussing whether or not they thought he was on his way out of this world, not calling for any help, not trying to get him any help whatsoever. They decided to take him out of the wetsuit, put him in some warm bath water, clean him up, then clothe him after drying him, put a toque on him, put socks and booties, and gave him a blanket, bundled him all up, re-put him back into that same room, and gave him a walkie-talkie and said, let us know if you need anything. Well, apparently he started to get a little bit better, and so much so that he was using that walkie-talkie too much, they thought, and so they ended up taking that walkie-talkie away. That was basically the last that anybody ever saw or heard from this boy. He was found unresponsive in his room, and of course, authorities came. We are now in the court process of dealing with this entire situation, this completely heartbreaking situation. It just baffles me that in this day and age, in 2022, when this had happened, and 2025, now we're dealing with the court system on the matter, that there can still be people that fool the social services system to the point of passing all of those checks that you need to go through, and all of those, hoops you need to jump through, and all of those things that you need to do in order to acquire the responsibility of somebody else's life in your hands. And not to mention just any life, life, a life that somebody is already traumatized from. That's something that needs even extra care, you know. But tell me your thoughts on this story, folks. I will be keeping you posted as we get some more information, and I'd love to know what you think about this story. So fill me in the comments section. Much love. I hope to see you again soon for another true story. Bye for now.